around, actually. Some of the classic early North American pirates still are funny even today. But there's a whole range of stations that are still out there that are just entertaining beyond belief, if you ask me. One of them is a comedy version of what we're doing here right now, Radio Azteca. The guy gets on, and his whole show is a parody of DXing and DXers and shortwave stations. And he ought to get a job writing for Letterman, because the guy actually is funny. Although I think he's been on long enough that people send him in jokes and he uses them. And the whole show goes on, and you hear all your friends made fun of, and it's hilarious. And that guy's on fairly regularly. There's a whole variety of weird things that you've heard, that I have heard over the years. When computers first started, we had the digital broadcasters that played nothing but computer music, and what are some of the other weird things that are on there? It's almost so diverse it's hard to characterize. There have been some foreign language pirates on purpose in foreign languages here, even though they're broadcasting to us. There have been some relays. The Mexican clandestine station in Chiapas, where there actually is unrest down in southern Mexico. There was some programming produced by people sympathetic to that cause, which was getting pirate relays here in North America. And there are actually some fairly mundane stations. One of the ones that's on right now that people like the most actually isn't clever at all. It's a guy named Jimmy the Weasel, who gets on there and sings, and his singing is using the term loosely. and most of his content is to make disparaging remarks about your mother and a few other catchphrases that he has, but it is so ridiculous that it's actually amusing and entertaining. And then he comes back and tries to get QSOs with people, and so you never know what's going to show up there. It's a different idea that pops into people's heads, and over the air it goes, and it's just pure creativity, which tends to be uneven. Obviously, some of them are pretty ugly, and some of them are first-rate broadcast productions. And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about the whole pirate scene is you get all that variability, and you never know what's coming next. And it is a vehicle for people to get on there and express themselves, which is one of the things we've been talking about in terms of the internet here today. Eventually, it has the potential to be doing that, and I guess already people are starting to experiment with it, so we're just in the early phases of that.
You know, you mentioned, I think Radio USA, and I'm not sure if that was the station, but one area, part of the spectrum that pirates used to broadcast in was like around 1610, 1620 or so, and recently, in the last couple of years, they opened up that X-band or whatever, where other stations, commercial stations have opened up between, 1600 or 1900 or whatever. Has there been any activity around 1.6 or so pirate-wise since the opening of the X-band?
I found that very interesting myself, Dave, because especially during the low end of the sunspot cycle, which we're not in at the moment, but 3 or 4 years ago, you get some pretty good propagation down there on the high end of the medium wave band. And not only that, people have receivers that will pick it up who are not hobbyists like us. So it always seemed to me that was a good idea. In fact, some stations have done that and made a splash. Some of Al Wiener's operations, when he used to be a pirate before he bought WBCQ, were down there on 1610, and he had quite an audience in New York and the front page of the New York Times for a few days. So that is a good place to go, although in recent years I've seen almost no activity down there. The X-band kind of clobbered the traditional frequencies, but why not just move up above the X-band up to 1710 or so, and people aren't doing it. Although, you can help me out on this one. There is something operating here in Cleveland on 1710. I'm not sure what it is. they play music all the time. I've never heard an ID on it. I am not sure whether it's one of those TIS traveler stations just playing music when it's not broadcasting the latest wreck or the latest barrels they put up on the freeway. But there is something there on 1710 in Cleveland. But I'm not seeing pirate activity in the sense that we know it down there, which is interesting, or perhaps unfortunate, really, because that's a good place to get an audience if you're a pirate.
Yeah, well, you mentioned 1710, and I don't know because I don't normally tune that area. About a year ago, I did a band scan, and I heard stations down in Texas and and all over. Early Sunday mornings are usually real good, just around sunrise or so, or just before sunrise, and you can hear a lot of stations. But I marked that down, and I'm going to make a note of that.
Neil Wolfish had a very interesting column in the current issue of the Ontario DX Association Bulletin, DX Ontario, where he was talking about how to hear every country or every state and province, I guess it was, on medium wave, and there was some discussion in there of this new X band, and then in Neil's column he pointed out that it isn't an expanded band anymore. It's starting to get pretty crowded down there. We all were listening to be the first person to hear a station on 1660 and so forth, and now there's a dozen stations on some of these channels, and so it's becoming like the graveyard frequencies in the regular band. So I'm not much of a medium wave DXer, but it certainly is not an easy thing to hear in Nevada like it was at first.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, when I did that band scan, early in the morning, you would hear stations, and they would come and go, and another station would come up. And it was really interesting. That was about a year ago. We're talking about Euro pirates and everything, and you did mention those two frequencies. Jay Novello had sent in, I think it was Radio Sunflower, yeah, on 15810, and he also heard
Radio Sunshine was the other one, I believe.
Yeah.
Although I think they were using a Dutch transmitter for the relay.
That was on 15050.
15070.
Okay.
That's a lot of Euro pirates are using that now. Those of us who have been around DXing a while recognize that frequency. For about 40 years, that was one of the main BBC frequencies. But they abandoned it. Well, it's not abandoned. It's still in use by quite a few Euro pirates. That's a good place to check, especially on weekends. They broadcast specifically to get to North America. It must be using the frequency like that.
Minute or two ago when you were talking about the Euro pirates and broadcasting from ships and stuff, George, I had vivid memories, recollections of Al Wiener and the Sarah.
Yes.
Can you fill us in on that? Can you tell us the history of that at all?
Yeah, I don't think I'm slandering Al. He admits to his criminal past. But he was the all-time blockbuster pirate of all time when he bought the Sarah, took it out beyond the U.S. Limit, he thought, and was broadcasting actually on several frequencies. He was not only on 1610, or was it 1620? I forget what it was. It was down there at the low end of the medium wave band. But he also had shortwave transmitters on the same boat, and you could hear them in parallel on 2 or 3 different frequencies. And that was, without a doubt, the biggest splash in pirate radio of the last 2 or 3 decades, because he was very widely heard in the biggest radio market in the country. That's what he was doing. He was broadcasting on purpose, so he'd be a station in New York. But one day the Coast Guard sent a ship out there. I have a tape of that, actually. Somebody sent me. The Coast Guard had a video camera with them while they were getting out their axes and chopping his transmitters up. And they put the Sarah off the air, but subsequently Al swore off disobedience and went through the FCC process and actually is the operator of a WBCQ now, which is on ironic. Well, it's not ironic. He picked the frequency on purpose, 7415.
Yeah, that used to be the old pirate frequency, right?
Yes, although the pirates had already abandoned it when WBCQ came on, because that whole area is just full of broadcasters now. When I first got into DXing, there were virtually no stations up above 40 meters there. But now the whole blockbusters everywhere you look. I remember the first station that went on 7415 was the Voice of America. When they expanded their Botswana relay about, must be about 15 years ago now, one of the frequencies they picked was 7415, and I remember running into Dan Ferguson at a conference not long after that, and he had a big grin on his face when he saw me. As he's the guy that picks the frequencies for the Voice of America.
Oh, a couple of weeks ago, Steve Cole from a Different Kind of Oldies show had made a comment. I just sent him a question there on the Internet Relay Chat, but he said that there was a movie or something, a Hollywood movie or something, where they actually blew up that boat, the Sarah. Do you know what that movie?
That's true, and I used to know the name of that, and I've printed it in my columns, and boy, Dave, when you get old, your memory's not as good as it was before, and
okay.
It's not coming to mind right now, but that is true. That is what happened to the ship that Wiener didn't buy that ship. He was leasing it, and after he was busted, obviously, it sat in Boston Harbor for a long time, if I recall, just sitting there rusting, and somebody bought it and blew it to smithereens as part of a movie.
Yeah, Steve will probably come up with it right now. Big Steve Cole, if you're listening, and I know you are because you just typed "blown away" there. What was the name of that movie that the Sarah was blown away in? I know you sent it about a month ago. We got into the topic of the Sarah in that. So maybe Steve, tap your knowledge there, and what was the name of that movie? Speaking of movies, George, I wonder if you've seen this the recent movie that's been out in the last maybe 2 or 3 months. It was with Dennis Quaid, and it's called Frequency.
Oh, I haven't. Although I usually wait to see movies on television, which is 5 years later in my case because I don't have cable.
Well, it was a movie about a ham radio operator, and it dealt with. Won't go into a lot of detail, but because of the sunspots, it was at a peak of a sunspot cycle, and you know, shortwave and propagation is such that you can talk all over the world. Well, in this movie. And it may seem a little bit strange or a little bit outer space, but this person actually talked to his father 30 years ago. He talked back in time 30 years ago. The movie was called Frequency, and it was out about 2 or 3 months ago.
Well, maybe I'll have to go up to Blockbuster to see if they have it, but you know, as long as you brought that subject up, I mean, people have talked about the whole thing of what's happened to our hobby, both in shortwave listening and in ham radio, where the numbers of people that are involved is certainly not what it was 10, 15 years ago. And the first villain that always comes up is the computer. The people are not going into DXing in the ham radio anymore because they're fascinated by computers. But I don't think that's what's the major force here. I think what's going on, Dave, is exactly what you brought up in terms of this movie. What is the debilitating force in ham radio is the cell phone. When I was a kid, when you could talk to Pitcairn Island on ham radio, or of course I didn't because I didn't have a license, but I could listen to it, and that was absolutely fascinating to me to hear that. But now I can be riding up the elevator in our building down at work, and a guy can be talking to Pitcairn Island right in the elevator
with his cell phone.
Yes, and that I said. So no, people don't have the fascination for that anymore that we used to have.
Oh, Big Steve tells me on Internet Relay Chat, George, that the movie was very appropriately. The name of the movie was very appropriately titled "Blown Away." But it wasn't really blown away. It was just an effect, special effect.
Well, I don't know the condition of that boat. I remember Chris Lobdell one time went down and looked at it. It was sitting in Boston Harbor someplace. So whether they actually blew it and sank it or whether it's still around somewhere, I'm really not sure.
I saw pictures of it on the internet, and I don't know whose site it was on or whatever, but I actually saw pictures of it, the only time I've ever seen it. And boy, it was quite rusty.
Yes, it wasn't exactly the Queen Mary, that's for sure.
The rust bucket. Yes, it was. And